We all know Ann Rule as being a best-selling true crime author. What you may not know is the path of progression that has taken her to where she is today. I recently visited with her at her Northwest home, where she shared with me how she got started. We'll also find out about her latest book, A Fever in the Heart, and other true cases.
A lot of people ask me, what is a nice girl like me doing in a genre like this? And I write, obviously, about the most heinous serial killers and family killers in America. And I think it's genetic, because I was born in Michigan. My grandpa Hanson was the sheriff of Montcalm County, and after him my Uncle Elton was, my Uncle Carl was the medical examiner, my cousin Bruce was the prosecutor. Everybody in my family is involved in law, law enforcement, social work, or teaching. And I would literally spend every summer in jail as a kid. I'd go for June, July, and August, and I was allowed to sit out in the office, which was under the same roof as the house and the jail, and watch as my grandpa brought prisoners in and be like a little mouse in the corner. And a lot of them looked so nice. And I would think, why are they different? What is it about them? And then I would think, why would any nice little child grow up to be a killer? And that is still what drives me. I want to know not the gory details, but the why of murder, what happened, or can we find what happened when they were children? The second thing is, how could my grandpa take a cigarette butt or a bullet or a hair or a torn piece of cloth and somehow track that back to a suspect? Well, now I know that's forensic science. And I have his forensic science book from the 40s that is outdated, but yet the basic principles still exist, that every killer leaves something of himself at the scene and takes something away, no matter how minute. So I just grew up with this, and all I ever wanted to be was a policewoman. But I came up to the University of Washington, and I got a degree in creative writing because it was easy. But I was taking criminology, penology, psychology, and when I graduated, I immediately became a Seattle policewoman. And I worked for a year and a half until they discovered I'm so nearsighted that I couldn't protect myself, much less arrest anybody, if my glasses were knocked off. And I passed everything in civil service #1 to be a policewoman. But I couldn't pass the medical exam. I couldn't see the big E. I couldn't see the wall. And that was the end of my police career. And I was so disappointed. I thought, oh, I couldn't even drive by the public safety building. But in the fullness of time, that training, my writing training, and they always say write about what you know about, and kind of a basic instinct for what makes people tick. I think it may be an inborn talent like musical talent, which I don't have. I am writing exactly what I want to write, and I think I'm doing probably what I was meant to do.
Well, tell us about your most recent book, A Fever in the Heart.
Well, this is a book that I've written 1,400 murder cases. This is one I never could forget. I covered a trial of a Yakima case that had been brought over in a change of venue to Seattle in 1975. And at that time, the mother of Morris Blankenbaker, one of the men who was killed, who was a football star, a wonderful guy, asked me to write a book. And I said, oh, Olive, nobody's going to buy a book from me. I was working for True Detective magazine as a stringer. And she told me then, she said, I'm dying of lung cancer, and I know you'll do it someday. And she gave me all these pictures. She said, hold on to them. 10 years later, I was over in Yakima, and I had sold a book at that point, The Stranger Beside Me by Ted Bundy. And I was giving a talk, and this lady was in line who looked kind of familiar, and she came up and she said, I didn't die. And it was Olive. And she said, when are you going to write the book? And I said, Olive, I am. As soon as I can get a space. I didn't want to do it then because all the kids involved were teenagers. And so last year, it was time. It was 20 years later, and I thought Olive can't still be there. But I called her in Yakima, and I said, do you remember me? And she said, yep. So this is the story of two football coaches, heroes to Yakima, who were best friends, but they both fell in love with the same woman. And it was just a general falling down from that point on. Both men ended up dead. The killer is the least likely suspect. It's more of a tragedy than it is where you can say he's a villain or he's a villain or she's a villain. It's just nobody won, everybody lost. But it's the most incredibly fascinating triangle and murder investigation that I think I've ever researched.
I understand you have a television project in the works as well as a couple of new books.
I do. We've already had 2 miniseries, and I work for Columbia TriStar as my own executive producer on all my books. So the first one will be A Fever in the Heart for NBC, and then also for NBC, Everything She Ever Wanted, my book about a Georgia Belle who was not a really good person. And then I have 2 books, 2 brand new books, one coming out in September, In the Name of Love. And then in January, the story of Dr. Deborah Green of Kansas City, who was convicted of poisoning her husband 4 times and setting fire to her own house with her children in it. A very tragic book, but a fascinating character study. And also my novel, Possession, is being re-released, so there'll be 3 books in 10 months.
Wow. Ann Rule has been my guest. The book is A Fever in the Heart, available at local bookstores. Ann, thank you for joining us today.